I've always believed that Iran is a threat to the United States. There's a long history of it being a threat. I would love to see regime change, but I've also maintained the position that that's going to have to be something the Iranian people do. Doesn't mean they can't do it with American assistance, but if we actually have to deploy ground troops in order to facilitate it, I don't believe that it's actually going to happen. I think Trump believes the same thing, which is why you haven't seen the deployment of major ground forces. By the same token, he still has to be able to threaten it to a country that he wants to get results out of. So this is why the press kind of makes me like insane sometimes, is because it's like, oh, I can't believe he said this, or I can't believe he threatened this. Yes, he's going to threaten a lot of things in order to try to get them to the negotiating table. Now, here's what I don't think is being properly understood or properly appreciated at this fact. There's a lot of Iranian money that has been frozen, which is to say the Iranians got it through oil sales or whatever else they did, but because it was in banks, Western banks, U.S. banks, where we had the ability to actually stop that from taking place, those assets are frozen. So we've seen this before with the United States as unfrozen assets. Obama did this again during the Iraq War, and I said multiple times I thought it was a stupid move. But that doesn't mean it's always a stupid move. It just meant, what are you getting for unfreezing the assets? Right? Obama was foolish enough to believe that what he was getting was the Iranian regime not pursuing nuclear weapons. Again, they're happy to lie to you about that. What's happening right now, theoretically, and again, there's still more things developing as we're even filming this right now, is that the Trump administration is willing to unfreeze certain limited assets in exchange for, once again, the unrestricted flow of oil out of the Strait of Hormuz and removal of mines. It's important to understand something here. If they actually get the removal of mines, and they actually get the unrestricted flow, that actually significantly reduces a lot of the pressure against the Trump administration right now. Because let's face it, you're always going to have the Dave Smiths of the world or the Tucker Carlsons of the world that have essentially just more and more just seem to be siding with Islam on everything against the United States, right? Dave Smith says we're the number one sponsor of terror with Israel, number two. Tucker Carlson has made his entire personality going after Israel, right? So there's that faction that this is just their new narrative. This is their reality, and nothing that you can say or show them or evidence that you present is going to get them to think otherwise. But there's other things going on right now that need to be understood. Obviously, countries which are more heavily dependent on Middle Eastern oil are going to be upset when the flow of Middle Eastern oil impacts their energy costs. It also impacts U.S. energy costs, even though we don't get a majority or even a significant amount of our imported oil from the Middle East. It still impacts us because it's a globally traded commodity. By allowing for the unrestricted oil to continue, by Iran theoretically removing their mines, like actively removing their mines, this resets a lot of things. Because you can't only think about this from the lens of, okay, is everything going to be successfully negotiated from this point on? Well, no. In order for negotiations to go in the way the U.S. wants, Iran has to know that the U.S. could come back and resume bombing, resume attacks. But theoretically, if the mines are removed or other capabilities are diminished, and the flow of oil starts again, is the U.S. now in a position where they can force the strait open in a way that they weren't able to do before? That remains to be seen. We don't know. But we do know that's an overall net positive, because everyone else that is saying, well, the proxies are not in the memorandum of understanding, or things like the ballistic missile program is not in the memorandum of understanding. Okay, that's true. That doesn't mean it can't be added, right? It doesn't mean it can't be added. Because what's to prevent it from being added later on? What is to prevent it from being a part of the negotiation? The memorandum of understanding is about, let's get back to the table. What are the conditions that are necessary to get back to the table? Well, the ballistic missile program is not necessarily there to get back. What is it? Strait of Hormuz. Because that's the most pressing issue right now, specifically for the United States. What's the pressing issue from Iran? Getting access to funds. Okay, well, there's a limited negotiation right there where they can get access to funds, and we can get the Strait of Hormuz opened. And some people will claim, well, the Strait of Hormuz was open before this, but they didn't have access to the funds. How is this not an Iranian win? It is in that sense, in that very narrow sense, except that if they would have got those funds before, they would have been using it for any number of things. If they get those funds now, well, they have to use it in a lot of things that they've lost as a result of the U.S. strikes. And just because they get that funds doesn't mean it gives them what they need to rebuild capacity, defense capacity. So there's an area here where theoretically, I'm not saying guaranteed, but theoretically, even if they get some of those funds and the Straits of Hormuz are opened up and the U.S. is able to reorient their forces in such a way as to prevent Iran from being able to mine in the future, this could reset the table. This could reset the table in the benefit of the United States. And that's an important thing to consider, because understand, Iran doesn't just need these funds. They need funds to be able to pay their soldiers. If you can't pay your soldiers, if you don't have sufficient capability to pay your troops, you're in a dangerous spot. And so I think Iran is actually in a far more tenuous position right now than is actually being given credit for. I think that's one of the reasons why they're allowing for the unrestricted flow of oil. If this was something where they could just wait out the Trump administration to the midterms, they'd do it. It doesn't make sense for them to come back to the table if they think they can legitimately wait it out to the midterms. They don't. So something's going on, right? The president resigning suggests that they are not able, because again, think about this from the mindset of the IRGC. They don't want the president, they don't want the elected realm of the government to be basically defying the Ayatollah. They don't want that. They can't afford it. They don't even know if the Ayatollah is getting this information because that guy is so underground right now in order to avoid a direct strike against him. So I don't think Iran is in as good a position as the left would have you believe. That doesn't mean that we've achieved all of our objectives. It doesn't mean everything has gone swimmingly for us. But them being willing to come back to the table to allow for unrestricted flow of oil, that signifies that something has shifted to where they desperately need these funds in a way to where they're willing to hand over their biggest bargaining chip right now. That's what needs to be understood. Their biggest bargaining chip is closing down the strait. Now, the only way I think they would do this is that they think they could close it again. They could close it down again. But we don't know if they can, especially if they remove mines, because mines are a big unknown.